Perry Copes, written and illustrated by Suzy Chase-Motzkin. All copyright 2020. This is number 6 in the Our Life Skills series. The author of this book does not presume to offer psychological therapy nor advocate the use of any technique for treatment of any specific or traumatic psychological condition without the approval and guidance of a qualified psychologist. The intent of the author is only to relate her personal experience in the hope that it may help to understand and develop coping mechanisms. If you use any of the information as a form of self-therapy, the author and publisher assume no responsibility for your actions. Dedication to a most beloved spirit, Carrie Jewel Dugo, and her beautiful children, Taylor, Chase, and Daniel. Quote, "If you accept the possibility of future lives, then death is just like changing your clothes." End quote. Dalai Lama. Author's note: They, whoever they are, say that 80% of the world's population believes in life after death. It was a fascinating topic for me after I had a near-death experience while giving birth to my first child. My perception from that event was that the other side of here was like going home. It was a comforting feeling, almost joyous, until I got the mandate there was more here for me to do. I suspected being here for my kids was at the top of that list. With that experience, I had lost my fear of dying, but though I knew that death was natural and beautiful, it did not take away the discomfort I felt at the idea of losing one of my children or another family member. I would grapple with the fear of my kids being, quote, in a ditch somewhere, with the balance of knowing that death itself is natural and beautiful. As much as I prepared myself for the eventual loss, the idea of the pain of separation weighed heavily. I had followed my near-death experience with a great deal of research. I read works by Raymond Moody, took out-of-body workshops, and enrolled in healing classes dealing with end-of-life situations. My friend, who had also had a near-death experience, and I, along with my brother, started writing a musical dramedy about a dead guy trying to communicate with his family. Throughout the process, it seemed there was always something more to learn about the other side of here and the condition of being human. Coping mechanisms, such as being aware of how I was framing situations with my thinking, and then modifying how I thought by reaching for a better or happier thought, became a regular practice. After I finished writing the draft and began the illustrations for Perry Copes, a young woman at the end stages of cancer, whom I was giving healing sessions to, was preparing to transition to the other side. She had a husband and 3 young children. This story does not tell her life, but it reflects the wanderings of her youngsters. She read them Perry Copes and created an environment where her death was framed as a spiritual journey to the other side. She asked me to participate and help her through her transition when the time came. It was my first time in a hospice environment, and I was concerned about my ability to be of service. As it turned out, everything came quite naturally for all of us. I'll be forever grateful for Carrie's desire for me to surround her with the comfort of touch, encouragement, energy, and sound. She was a guide for a number of her healers and friends. As my teacher, Carrie provided me with an intimate experience where I learned volumes. I have called upon her for strength and understanding at times, and I hope her children feel her presence when they think of her too. When my mother died, someone offered me comfort by telling me my mother was more a part of me after she had passed than she had ever been when she was alive. Initially, I was too devastated to grasp the meaning of that statement, but over the years I have come to realize how true she was. We sometimes will get the sense that someone is looking over us. We jerk our heads to try to catch a shadow, or sometimes we smell a smell that couldn't possibly be in the location we are at. Sometimes we get a shiver or a knowing about something. We are energy in flesh form. Energy never dies. It just changes form. With blessings, Suzy Chase-Motzkin. Perry copes. Perry loved going to his grandparents' home during the week before camp. One of his favorite things to do while visiting was to paint pictures with his grandmother. He called her Goggy ever since his first try saying grandma when he was a baby. Everyone thought it was cute, so the name stuck. During the visit, Goggy took Perry into her art studio and set him up with a canvas and paints. The two of them sat painting for hours. As his grandmother encouraged him, Perry asked if she thought he would ever be able to draw and paint as well as she could. Goggy explained anyone can make art and everyone has their own style. Different people like different things. What's important is that you are able to express and create what you see or think in your own way. All it takes is practice to get better and better. Perry thought about his grandmother's art students whose work hung around her studio. Each painting did have its own style. Perry liked some better than others. He guessed those students just needed more practice. I don't like the painting in the middle, he said, pointing to the pegboard wall with a grouping of 3 paintings. Really, she said with surprise. I really like that one. It has wonderful freedom and perspective. Look at how the boat is being tossed by the waves. Try as he might, Perry could not see the, quote, boat, and he had never seen water that color before. The picture confused him, and he went back to his own work. His grandmother began cleaning up her studio while Perry put the finishing touches on his painting of a barn. Gramps called them down to the kitchen, so Perry cleaned his brushes. Before leaving the studio, Goggy put her arm around Perry's shoulder as they stood back to look at his painting. I think you have some great talent, Perry. Your barn is wonderful. We will let it dry and show everybody in the morning. Perry's mother and father were helping his grandparents prepare dinner. Gramps handed Perry a basket of fresh green beans from the garden and instructed him to snap off the ends. Perry watched and listened to them all talk as he snapped the seemingly endless pile of green beans. The conversation at the dinner table was lively as they discussed current events heard on the news. When the topic came around to a famous actor who had just lost his life to a lengthy disease, Goggy, who had been rather quiet, suddenly announced, "He's lucky to be free from suffering anymore. Now he can reincarnate. If I'm ever in a situation where my quality of life is ruined, I hope you all would love me enough to pull the plug. Oxygen pumps and feed." "What's reincarnate and pulling the plug, Goggy?" Perry asked. Pulling the plug means to stop the machines that are keeping the body going, and reincarnating means to come back and live another life. I believe I have already had many lives, Goggy answered. But in this lifetime, if I needed machines to keep me alive, I would rather be free of them and have my family pull the plug. Jumping up to put his arms around his grandmother, Perry pleaded, "But Goggy, I don't want you to die." Hugging him tightly, she softly said the words that often get stuck in one's throat. "We are all born and we all eventually die. I think after we make our mark in the world, we go back to the place from where we came and get ready to do it again. When it's my time to pass, I just want it to be quick." "Your grandmother is not going anywhere soon," Gramps chimed in. "Let's clear these dishes and get out on the lake to fish while they're biting, Perry." Perry's mother handed him the bait and ushered them outside. "Don't worry about the dishes. Go catch some fish." Perry and Gramps floated in the canoe on the lake. They cast their bait into the water by the shoreline. All was still and quiet when Perry suddenly blurted out, "What happens when we die, Gramps?" Gramps thought for a moment and then shared, "I bet if you put 100 people in a room, they would each have their own idea about what happens. Different cultures have different theories about what happens to the soul after the body stops working. What's interesting is that almost every religion believes in a life after death, whether it is in heaven or right here on Earth. There are even people who believe you can choose to live on other planets, too." "Other planets? What do you believe?" Perry questioned. "I put my attention on living this life with purpose while I'm here. Your grandmother feels the same, but she also has a very strong belief in reincarnation." "Do other people besides Gagi believe in reincarnation?" "Some cultures base their lives all around it. In Hinduism, Buddhism, and some other religions, most people believe how they have lived in their lives determines how they reincarnate. Some call it karma, which means that if people are good, they will have a better existence the next time around. And if they're bad, they may have difficult lessons to live through." "Yes, I've heard about karma, but what about other religions?" Perry asked. "My friend Matt says he's going to heaven when he dies, but the lady who lives down the road from us will probably go to hell because she is so mean. What religions believe in heaven and hell? Heaven sounds awesome, but hell sounds horrible." "It sure does," Gramps agreed. "Most of the world's religions believe in the notion of heaven and hell. Their idea of heaven, being a place that one goes after living a good and honest life, is somewhat like the idea of karma. And if you have been bad, well, you know. But I've often thought that heaven and hell are part of our daily lives, a state of mind caused by how we think about things. Depending on whether you are born Christian, which there are many variations like Catholic, Baptist, and Mormon to name a few, or if you're Islamic or Jewish, the description of what happens after one dies varies from believer to believer." Perry scrunched up his face. "What do you mean?" "Well, a lot of religions and spiritual traditions agree that soul or spirit is non-physical, meaning that we can't see or touch it, like electricity. Most people believe that our consciousness, or mind, you might say, is connected to God." "Like we all have a direct line to God with our thinking?" Perry wondered. "Exactly. Some people think that we are all God in spirit, and that energy is what sparks our life and animates our bodies." Gramps continued to lecture as he started wiggling his fingers in Perry's face to show him what he meant by animate. "It's how we move and do things. It's the force or source that helps us to think and move our bodies." Perry was fascinated by what his grandfather was telling him. If nearly all of the religions in the world believe there is something after this life on Earth, there must be something to the idea. "As I said before," Gramps continued, "sometimes I feel though the world we live in is both heaven and hell. I think we go through hell when we struggle and are fearful of things. Or we could experience heaven every day in the beauty and wonder of our world. When it comes right down to it, the way we think determines what we experience, whether positive or negative." "I like that idea, Gramps," Perry noted. "I do too," Gramps agreed. "So Gagi believes we all come back and live in the flesh again, and though I like that idea, life and death have always been a mystery to me. What I do know, Perry, my boy, is that we should make the most out of every day we are here." Perry's fishing line started pulling. The rod bent with the fish trying to swim away. With his grandfather's coaching, Perry excitedly reeled in the huge largemouth bass. It took some time before his grandfather scooped it up in the net. "That one's a beautiful fish, Perry," Gramps declared, holding up the bass. He showed Perry how to gently take the hook out of the fish's mouth. Then, after one last look at that magnificent fish, his grandfather dropped it back into the lake, where it swam quickly away. The conversation Perry had with his Gramps in the boat was interesting to him, but he did not like the idea of anybody he loved dying, whether it was a person's time or not. Perry admitted the idea of his soul or spirit going on forever brought him comfort, but if he couldn't hug and talk to the people he loved, he didn't like the idea. Later that night, as his mother was tucking him into bed, Perry brought up the subject again. "Mommy, why do we have to die?" "I'm not sure, Perry. Maybe we can transform into something new and different. Though it certainly isn't something I would try to rush, even in the worst of times," she considered. "Dying should happen in its own natural order. We go when it's our time to go." "But I don't want to die, and I don't want you to either," Perry cried. Wiping the tears from his cheeks, his mother assured Perry, "Sweetheart, I think we just pass into another dimension or place. Our physical bodies eventually stop working, but the soul or spirit that makes us move and think goes on forever." Oddly, she wiggled her fingers as Gramps had done. Perry wiggled his own, looking at his fingers as if he had never wiggled them before. He was fascinated by the idea that just a thought could move a body part. His mother continued, "Science shows that energy never stops existing. It only changes form. So when our physical bodies quit on us, the energy that moves us goes back to its source. Some people think of that place as heaven. Some people claim that they can actually connect with that place." "What do you mean?" Perry gulped. She reached for a book that was on the nightstand. She thumbed through the pages and exclaimed, "Ha! Take a look at this book. Can you see some of the print faintly on the page behind this one?" his mother asked. Perry sat up to see more clearly what she was talking about. "I see," he replied. "Imagine that when someone dies, they are still in the same book, but just on another page. Better yet, another chapter in the same book. So the book is the universe, and each chapter is one of our lives, and within that chapter are the pages or layers of our experiences." She checked to see if he was following her explanation. "Some people can see through the pages and see what is there. I think I can see through 2 pages. How many can you see through?" Perry squinched his eyes and examined the book. "I can see what's on the 3rd page, he boasted. "Maybe someday we will all be able to see through the, quote, pages of this life, to see those we love on the other side. But the day you and I switch chapters will be a long time off. We have a lot of living to do first." Perry's mother handed her son the book and kissed his forehead. "Sleep well, honey. Tomorrow we'll be bringing you to camp." "I can't wait to see Sean and the guys," Perry smiled. "I'll miss you and Daddy, but I can't wait to move up from explorers to wayfinders." Kissing Perry again, "We'll miss you too. But you'll have so much fun. You're growing up so fast. Before you know it, Perry, you'll be a counselor like your daddy was." As his mother left the room, Perry smiled at the idea of being a counselor. He slept soundly and awoke to the smell of cooking. Rubbing his eyes, he entered the kitchen to find Gramps making cornmeal pancakes. Perry was surprised and happy to see that Goggy placed his painting on the counter for all to see. She put it in a gold frame, and it was leaning against the cabinet. The light above made the colors really stand out. His mother and father started talking over each other's words. They were gushing to Perry about how great the painting was. Goggy told Perry she loved his painting so much she wanted to keep it for others to see. Perry liked the idea of having her students see his work and agreed to leave it with her. His parents protested as they wanted it too. After the drive to camp and stopping for lunch along the way, they lugged bedding and a trunk to Perry's cabin. His mother started to make his bed and put things away. Perry insisted they not stay around and baby him, so he walked his parents back to their car. The three of them hugged all together, and then his mother kissed and hugged him one more time. From the path by the main office, Perry waited and watched them get into the car. They pulled out of their parking spot and then paused to wave at Perry. As they drove away, Perry waved energetically until he could no longer see the car. While Perry was with his parents, Carlos and Ben moved in. They were good friends from Perry's cabin the summer before. Just as Perry approached the cabin, they were leaving to go to the main office. Their counselor, Jerry, told him they would be right back. Jerry knew it was going to be a fun time at camp. He was alone in the cabin, flipping through comic books, when Sean, his twin brother Nolan, and Sean's father noisily entered the cabin. Perry jumped up to hug his best camp friend. They had bunked together for 3 summers. "Sean, I thought you'd never get here. I saved the bunk next to mine for you. My mom saw that you were on the list to come this summer. Hi, Mr. Bale. Hey, Nolan." Without much of a response, Mr. Bale excused himself. "Sean, keep an eye on Nolan while I get your bedding." Perry noticed a cloud of sadness around both his friend and his father, but Sean's brother was full of joy. Perry wondered, "How's it been, Sean?" Sean choked on the words. "It's okay." Nolan bounded between them. "Mommy died. She's like an angel now, but she doesn't have wings. Her body quit working." He thought for a moment. "Because it quit working, and now she's an angel." "Stop it, Nolan," Sean barked at his twin. "But Sean, Mommy had cancer and now she's like an angel," Nolan said urgently. "She's here, but she is like an angel. Sean can't see her." "Stop, Nolan," Sean yelled loudly at his brother. Perry had assumed that Sean's mother was still at the car organizing things. "Oh, Sean," he said, watching Nolan, looking at his comic books. "That's horrible. What happened?" Over Nolan's prattle about the characters in the comic books and what their special powers were, Sean sunk on the bunk and began telling Perry that his mother had gotten suddenly sick in the fall after camp. Within a few months she was gone. "We thought she was getting better. Then it was like she just gave up," Sean sniffed. With one of Perry's comic books in his hand, Nolan stood in front of Perry and sang, "Mommy's like an angel. She's here right now. She's going to watch over Shawnee. She's going to watch over me too. Mommy's like an angel. Mommy is." Nolan trailed off. And then, holding the comic book up, excited, he asked, "Can I have this?" Without hesitation, Perry told him he could have that one and handed him another. Nolan plopped down onto his belly, carefully looking over the comic books. He couldn't read all the words, but he loved the images. Turning the pages, Nolan was making up a story to go along with the pictures. He never stopped telling the story when Mr. Bale returned to help make Sean's bed and get him settled. Mr. Bale and Sean hugged, and Perry could see that Sean's father was holding back tears. "Nolly, we have to get you to camp too. Hug your brother goodbye now." "I'm going to camp too," Nolan chirped. Sean hugged his brother and told him to have fun at camp. At first, Nolan stood there limply, and then he lifted his arms quickly, hugging his brother. He paused like he was thinking of hugging Perry, but instead walked to the door. "Nolan, did you thank Perry for the comic books?" Sean checked. "Thank you," Nolan stumbled. "I'm going to camp now. We're all going to camp." "Have fun at camp, Noli," Perry answered, knowing that Nolan went to a nearby camp for special needs. "I go to a different camp. Mommy is staying here and she's coming with me too. Mommy's like an angel and she can be everywhere at the same time," he went on. While Nolan was repeating over and over about their mother being everywhere at once, their father hugged Sean tightly, telling him to have fun. Sean nodded his head, looking at the floor. A tear dropped, leaving a splat mark on the wooden floor. Jerry walked in as Mr. Bale and Nolan were leaving, and Sean busied himself with his cubby. 2 more families arrived to drop off campers, completing Jerry's gibbers, as was painted on the board that hung on the cabin door. Jerry was the sailing instructor who taught Perry to sail, so he knew the word was connected to sailing. Jerry taught him how to jibe, which was moving the sail from one side of the boat to the other. He was pretty sure jib was a little sail that went in front of the big one. Sean busied himself in the corner by his bunk while Perry greeted 2 new boys and their families. After the other boys returned to the cabin, Jerry announced that dinner and orientation would be in 1 hour. They were to finish getting settled, wash up, and then meet back at the cabin to review the rules before dinner. The lingering parents hugged their boys, while Sean zipped past everyone to get to the latrine. Perry quickly followed him. Sean had already run inside. The place was empty but for a pair of feet behind one of the doors. Perry turned on the faucet to wash his hands and timidly asked Sean if he was okay. He didn't answer, so Perry went on. "Sean, this must be really hard for you. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but just know that if you want to, I'm a really good listener." Hands in pocket, Sean nudged through the door with his shoulder. As he moved toward the sink next to Perry, he confided, "I miss my mom, and I don't want my dad to be alone without me." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hands and was about to say more, just as 3 other boys entered. Sean spun on his heels to face away from them, and he left through the shower exit. Perry followed, and then walked beside him on the path toward the lake. Perry didn't speak until Sean began. "My mother really wanted me to go back to camp. She kept on making me promise before she died. I just don't feel like being happy. She's not happy. She's dead." Perry wasn't sure how to respond, so he stayed quiet. "I just really miss her," Sean sighed. "Maybe you should listen to your brother. Nolan seems pretty sure that she's around," Perry baited. "Really, Perry?" Sean looked wide-eyed. "What would Nolan know about that? We're 11 and he just started learning how to read and tell time." "I don't know. Maybe he can see her. My mom told me that some people can see the other side of here. If I had a book in my hand right now, I'd show you," Perry shared. "I was just at my grandfather's house, and he told me a bunch of things about what people believe happens when our bodies conk out. He says that most of the people in the world believe there is a life after death, but people's descriptions are different. He and my mom say there's a special force in us that makes us think and move our bodies like this." Perry wiggled his fingers in front of Sean's face. Sean winced and moved his head away. "You can't see electricity, but it's there, this force," he said, wiggling his fingers. "Is our spirit or whatever." Perry stopped for a moment, thinking it odd that he had just had this conversation the day before with his grandfather and mother. It was almost like it happened so he could share the information with Sean. Perry could see the interest in his friend's eyes as he explained. My mom said that energy can't die or stop. All it can do is change. Gramps said a lot of people think that your spirit hangs out in this other place that people call heaven or something until we're ready to be born again. Do you think that's true? Sean asked. When my grandfather was telling me, it felt true. I like the part about our spirit living forever and changing bodies. Perry suddenly had an idea as he spotted the spring on the gate. Sean, do you see that stretched out spring on the gate? Yeah, Sean confirmed. You can imagine looking at the spring as our spirit and each loop of the metal one of our lives. We stay a part of the spring, but each time we go around, it's a different experience. It's like the changing seasons. I don't know. That just kind of popped out of my head out of nowhere, Perry decided. I just think it's kind of neat that your brother is happy and feels your mom around him. He was really sure she was also with you. Maybe you will begin to feel it too. So you think Nolan was right? Do you think my mom is like an angel? Sean wondered. Shrugging his shoulders, Perry swung open the gate. The sound of it squeaking snapped Sean into exclaiming, We have to get back to the cabin. After dinner, the whole camp gathered around the big campfire. The counselors told stories and led the group in song. Perry knew all of the songs by heart from the summers before. Sean stuck by his side and started to relax, sing, and laugh a little upon returning to their cabin. All of the boys chattered until Jerry warned them to quiet down and sleep. The sounds of sleep soon filled the cabin while Perry tossed and turned, thinking about his friend. He didn't know how he would handle it if it were his mother who had died. His mother and grandfather's words about making the most out of living while we are here kept rolling through his head. Perry closed his eyes and tightly imagined a colorful star shining down through the top of his head. He would always start his star meditation with 3 deep breaths. He must have exhaled the third one loudly because Sean whispered, Hey, Perry, are you awake? Perry whispered back, I was just thinking, what's up? Perry and Sean were suddenly startled to see Jerry standing between their bunks. He whispered, Hey guys, come outside for a minute. I want to share something. Though the moon was just a sliver in the sky, it shone brightly upon them. The boys followed Jerry to sit on the steps of the cabin. I'm going to tell you a story. It's a sad one, so be easy on me if I start crying. They remained silent as the 3 cast their gaze toward the lighted path to the latrine. Jerry cleared his throat and began his story with a shaky voice. I was 15 when my pop died. He and Mom were fighting about him losing his job. I was doing homework in my room, but could hear everything. Pop was blaming Mom for his troubles, and she was crying. I couldn't stand his anger anymore, so I went into the kitchen to try and calm him down. It only made matters worse. He turned to me with an intense rage and accused me of adding to his problems. Then he slammed out of the house. That night, he fell into the water by the boat docks where he used to work. A friend found him the next morning and then came by the house to tell us he was gone. I thought for the longest time it was my fault. If I hadn't asked him to stop yelling, he never would have left the house. It really messed me up for a long time. I felt so guilty and kept on thinking, if only I was a better son, if only I stayed out of the kitchen that night, if only I had told him how much I loved him. Jerry sniffed as he composed himself. It wasn't your fault, Perry supported. Yeah, Perry, It took a good therapist and time before I was able to let go of my guilt and fear. It was a few months after I let go of my feelings that I started to feel normal again. I realized he was the one who made his own decisions that horrible night. Even though I could understand the situation better, I still missed Pop. But then I started to feel him. It was almost like he was connected to me. Once I let go of my anger and guilt, I started to experience some strange things. Pop always loved sailing, and I decided to get a job at the marina. Often I would be on a sailboat, and all of a sudden I would know things about sailing that I was never taught. A few times when I thought about him, I got a warm feeling and thought I smelled the shaving cream he used. At first it freaked me out. But now when I feel his presence or smell that smell, it makes me smile and my day becomes better. I know my dad loved us, but he always had trouble speaking from his heart. Now I feel his heart as if it's part of my own. I will always trust my feelings. The sounds of crickets and frogs became quite loud when Jerry stopped telling his story. They sat there for a moment longer, listening to the creatures' orchestra. Then Jerry ushered them back to their bunks. "Thanks," Sean said to Jerry. "I feel a little better knowing that someone other than my brother thinks that my mom could still be around." He rolled toward the wall and sighed. It wasn't a heavy sigh like Perry heard Sean do earlier that day. It was more like a sigh of relief. Perry smiled. He was glad that his friend wasn't as sad as before. A deep sense of rightness washed over him, and Perry wondered if anyone really knew the nature of death. But then he reasoned, why would so many believe that there is a life after death if it wasn't true? He pondered the idea for a bit and then decided he had better try to sleep. Perry breathed deeply and began to picture a bright, colorful star over him. It was bigger and brighter than he usually pictured. As he imagined the warmth of the light washing over him, it felt like being in the arms of love. Perry basked in the light of his star and fell into a deep sleep. There was so much to do at camp, leaving little time to think of home. Everyone in the cabin got along well, and Sean seemed to settle in comfortably. After about 2 weeks, Sean awakened Perry just before dawn. Sean tapped him on the shoulder and whispered urgently, "Perry, Perry, wake up! She came! My mom came last night!" Perry lifted his sleepy head to try to understand what Sean was telling him. "My mom was in my dream, but it felt so real. I felt like I was right there with her. She looked happy and healthy like she did before she was sick. She told me she would always be with me and that all I had to do was think of her and she would be there. It was weird. We didn't speak out loud. It was like our minds were talking. Am I crazy? It felt so real," Sean gushed. Perry whispered back, "Wow, cool. I don't think you're crazy. That's so great you got to see and feel her. I've wondered whether that place where our mind goes when we are asleep is the same place we go when our bodies quit. Sorry I woke you up, but I just had to tell you. It was so real. I think Nolan was right after all," Sean exhaled. "I'm going to try to fall back asleep." Something shifted in Sean after that first dream of his mother. His mood lightened, he smiled more, and he was able to enjoy his time at camp. Perry thought it was interesting that as soon as Sean believed in the possibility, he finally felt his mother in a dream. It seemed the more relaxed and happy Sean was, the more he felt his mother, just like Jerry told them. It happened more and more once he stopped trying so hard. By the end of camp, Sean had a whole new perspective. He seemed a lot happier. Both boys made great new friends. Hugging goodbye, Sean thanked Perry for being such a good friend, and each boy vowed to return the following summer. Though the camp was amazing, Perry was glad to be going home to see his other friends at school. Months passed until one evening his mother got a call from Gramps. She sounded very concerned. Perry was on his way to bed when the phone rang. When he heard the ringing, he stopped on the stairs to hear who it was. As he listened, he grew concerned. His mother was asking a lot of questions in rapid fire. "What did the doctors say? Are they sure? Can't they do something?" His mother ended the conversation with, "I'll be there in the morning after Perry goes to school." Perry returned to the kitchen with a frightened look on his face. "What's wrong with Goggy?" "Everything is okay, sweetie," his mother assured. "Get up to bed. It's a school night." He could hear the stress in her voice. His mother's whole being darkened with worry. Perry surrounded his mother with his arms and held tightly. His father patted him on the shoulder and ushered him off to bed while his mother quickly picked up the phone. From upstairs, he could still hear what was happening in the kitchen. Perry listened carefully by his bedroom door and could tell that his mother was talking to her brother, his Uncle Phil. His mother was speaking urgently, so Perry couldn't understand all the words. He was starting to worry about Goggy. As Perry's father began climbing up the stairs, Perry turned off the light and jumped into his bed. His father entered and sat on the edge of the bed, explaining that Perry's grandmother had suddenly gotten sick and had been taken to the hospital. He tried to assure him that Goggy had great doctors caring for her. Something did not feel right to Perry. He thought there was more to the story than he was told. He felt his parents were keeping something from him. It was upsetting. He wanted them to stop hiding information with him. He felt he was old enough to understand a lot of things. After his father returned downstairs, Perry got up again to listen by the door. He heard bits and pieces of the conversation. He heard the words stroke and heart problems, and then he heard his mother say, "Intensive care, but she is stable for now." He wasn't sure what it all meant, but he was sure it was bad. The word stable gave Perry some hope. He was able to turn away from the door and get back under the covers. He thought and prayed for his grandmother to be okay. He smiled to himself, remembering the last time they were together. They sat side by side painting. She had shown him how to shape the barn. Perspective, she called it. The word perspective kept repeating over and over in his head. When they were painting, Goggy taught him that perspective showed if objects were close or far away. He had also heard the same word used in a different way at school. His teacher had said, "from my perspective," and he knew it had something to do with thinking. Then he thought it was strange that one word could mean two things. Perry thought about near and far and imagined someone's thinking could be here or there. He realized that moment that the two uses of the word perspective were very similar after all. Perry closed his eyes, imagining what his perspective was in his grandmother's story. Would she be flipping to another page of the book of life, as his mother had described? He wanted to see Goggy on this page, and he imagined hugging her as he drifted off to sleep. The next morning, Perry asked if he could go to the hospital with his mother. His mother answered, "Hopefully your grandmother will get better quickly. Just go to school and don't worry about anything." Instead, Perry thought of his grandmother all day long. That evening, during dinner, Perry demanded, "I want to see her." "Honey, I'm sure she would want for you to remember her as she was when she was healthy," Perry's mom shared. "She is very weak and not able to speak with you." "I want to talk to her and hug her," Perry argued. "We're afraid you will be even more upset if you see her like that," his father reasoned. They kept giving him reasons why he shouldn't go to the hospital, but Perry persisted in trying to get them to understand his point of view. His perspective, he thought. He was sent off to bed with the usual "it's a school night," feeling he had been defeated. After all, he couldn't get to the hospital on his own. He thought about his friend Sean, who was never told about what was happening to his mother when she was dying. Sean's father said he did it to protect Sean. "Dad thought I was too young to understand," he told Perry. Perry thought his parents were doing the same thing to him now. He didn't want to be like Sean, who seemed to be really angry with his father for not trusting him and for keeping secrets about his mother's sickness. Perry and Sean agreed that parents should realize their kids are able to understand things pretty well. The thought of Sean's situation made Perry's heart hurt. He rolled over on his side and pulled the covers up over his face. Just his face was peeking out of the covers. The click of the door opening made him flinch. His mother sat on the edge of Perry's bed, placing her hand warmly on his shoulder. "Daddy and I have talked it through, and we've decided we'll bring you to the hospital with us tomorrow. I will call the school to tell them in the morning." Perry reached excitedly to hug her. As they embraced, she whispered how special he was. With a kiss on his forehead, she left. During the drive to the hospital, Perry noticed the budding trees, which seemed to die every fall. Their leaves would turn brown and then drop to the ground. The trees looked dead as they slept through the winter. Then, like magic, buds would appear on the trees in the spring. Thinking of the seasons and the time he told Sean about the gate spring at camp, Perry blurted, "It seems like dying is one of the only things we know will definitely happen in this world, like Mommy's flowers every winter. If it happens all the time, why does it hurt so much to see someone you love get ready to leave?" "It's true, Perry. Passing on is one thing we can definitely count on. We just don't know when," his father counseled as he parked the car. "That makes it all the more important to create a good life for ourselves while we can." Perry felt quite out of sorts when he got into the elevator at the hospital. He stared at the numbered lights indicating which floor they were at. His mother explained that he was going to a part of the hospital that was very serious. "The people on this floor are very sick, and you will be seeing a lot of machinery that doctors and nurses use to help them," his mother said in hushed tones as they left the elevator. They passed through a doorway that opened automatically when his father pushed a large button on the wall. Perry craned his head to peek into each room they passed. There were all kinds of machines making beeping and whooshing sounds. One of the rooms had doctors and nurses busily caring for a patient. Another room had someone hooked up to something that looked like a computer with hoses. Just outside Goggy's room were a lineup of different medical contraptions. Gramps was in the chair to the side of his grandmother's bed, and Perry rushed to give him a hug. Perry watched his mother kiss Goggy's forehead. His grandmother didn't move at all. It was almost as if she was gone from her body. Perry did not see much light around her. He stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it all in. Though Goggy lay sleeping, Perry could picture her broad smile in his mind. He moved to stand by her bed. His heart sank when he noticed there was no spark of that smile when he announced, "Hi, Goggy, it's me, Perry." During their entire visit with his grandmother, Perry talked about all the paintings he was going to paint with her when she got home from the hospital. Goggy did not open her eyes or answer at all. The only thing he heard was the whooshing and clicking of machinery that was hooked up to his grandmother. Perry hoped Goggy would wake up soon. What seemed like a week to Perry was really only a few days of his mother going back and forth to the hospital. Goggy had not awoken, and there was much discussion about what to do. Perry's Uncle Phil thought they should not use machinery to keep her alive. Gramps was the one who was to make the final decision. He was holding off for Perry's mother to be at peace with it. Goggy was still with them, but she wasn't awake or talking. It made everyone feel better to hug her and tell her the things they always wanted to say, but most of the time was spent listening to the machinery whiz and pump. During dinner at their house, Perry listened to his parents, uncle, and grandfather painfully talk about the decision of unplugging the machines that were keeping Goggy alive. Perry remembered that Goggy was very sure she didn't want to be kept alive with machinery. He was halfway glad that Gramps responded, "You all know her belief was strong. This is not how she would want to exist. As much as I don't want to let go, we must. Your mother would have wanted us to set her free," Gramps said to Perry's mom. The decision had been made, and tearfully they hugged each other good night. Uncle Phil and Gramps would meet them at the hospital the following day. There was silence in the car all the way to the hospital. Perry felt sick to his stomach, but he knew what was going to happen was the right thing to do. He was really glad his parents let him come because there was some discussion it would be too sad for him to be there. Perry's Uncle Phil met them at the doorway, looking worried and upset. He picked Perry up off the ground and hugged him. Even though he was a big kid, Perry always loved when Uncle Phil lifted him up in the air. After lowering Perry to the floor, his mother hugged her brother and then went to Goggy's bedside after kissing her father, who was sitting in the chair next to the bed. His father nudged him. "Move closer to Goggy, Perry." He gained the courage to step toward Goggy's side, and Perry's mother moved to give him room. Perry put a hand on Goggy's upper arm and stretched to kiss her cheek. It was cold and gray in color. He stood on his toes to kiss her again on her forehead, as his mother had done. He lingered at her brow, hoping to bring warmth and life into her passing face. "Goggy, it's me, Perry. I just want to tell you how much I love you, and it's okay for you to go to your next life," he whispered. Everyone was watching Perry kiss his grandmother. As he spoke the words, her eyebrows raised and a hint of smile came to her face. Perry shot a look at his mother breathlessly, exclaiming to everyone, "Did you see that?" "I saw it," his mother chimed. "I think she smiled at you." His grandmother had not smiled, talked, or moved since she was brought to the hospital. Everyone was surprised. Perry moved away so his mother could move in closer. "Mama," Uncle Phil uttered from the other side of the bed as he touched her shoulder. "Mama, it's me, Philly. Can you hear me, Mama?" Perry's father helped Gramps get out of the chair so he could move closer. Uncle Phil held out his arm to bring his father beside him. Held around his shoulders by his son, Gramps held Goggy's hand in both of his. "Sweetheart, we are all here with you. I've loved you from the moment I saw you. I want you to know that I will always love you. We will all love you, and your spirit will give us strength. We will be okay without you. You can let go. We will all be okay." "We all love you very much," Perry's mother added. Perry unexpectedly had a very strange feeling and wondered what it was about. Suddenly, along with a deep breath, his grandmother's eyes opened. Her face looked happy and full of wonder. It appeared to Perry she had seen something far in the distance past all of them. Then the look on his grandmother's face went blank. Alarms rang in the room and across the hall, summoning 2 charging nurses. Perry let his eyes relax to see his grandmother beyond the commotion. What Perry could see was a cloudy glow of white just above his grandmother's body. Suddenly, the cloud body disappeared. Perry's mother stood holding her still mother's shoulders as a nurse delivered the news to Gramps, who slumped into the chair next to the bed. With tears freely running down his face, Uncle Phil patted Gramps on the shoulder and asked if he was going to be all right. As his uncle stooped to hug Gramps, Perry felt his father's hand on his back, guiding him toward the door. Nobody stopped the machines, but Gagi just died, didn't she? Perry whispered to his father. Yes, Perry, I believe she did, his father answered, sitting next to him in the intensive care unit family lounge. She was surrounded by love when we let her go. He patted Perry's knee in comfort. I wonder what she was looking at when her eyes opened. I can't even describe what I felt at that moment. Perry spotted the tissue box and grabbed some for his father. Wiping his eyes and blowing his nose, he remarked how grown up Perry acted. His mother, Uncle Phil, and Gramps walked into the family lounge, and they all shared sniffled hugs and words of comfort. Perry felt badly that he wouldn't paint with Gagi again, and he felt sorry for the blanket of sadness over his family. There was an ache in his stomach that wouldn't go away, and the corners of his mouth could only go down. Perry felt like there was a big cave inside his heart and belly, and its hurt brought burning tears to his eyes. After they got home, Perry's mother endlessly told the story of Gagi's passing on the phone with concerned friends and neighbors. Perry was sad that his grandmother had passed, but he wondered if his life was ever going to return to normal. He hated seeing his mother so upset. She almost always had tears in her eyes. Uncle Phil stayed with Gramps, who lived pretty far from Perry's house, and his mother was on the phone with them a lot, too. She would turn the phone to speaker while she was baking and cooking, which also seemed endless. Uncle Phil, though sad, kept telling funny stories about their childhood, bursting them all into laughter. Perry listened with close attention, learning new things about when his mother was little. Though just as quickly as they would laugh, they would cry. The adults talked about arrangements. Perry knew it had to do with some kind of funeral for his grandmother. His camp friend Sean told Perry how hard it was to sit at the funeral parlor looking at his mother's empty body. He described to Perry that the body in the coffin felt nothing like his mother. Sean thought her body looked like it was a store mannequin in a box. Perry was glad his family decided to have something called an open house memorial celebration, where people would come to his grandparents' house and share food, drink, and stories. It was settled. Over the summer, they would bring her ashes to a special place she loved. That Saturday, as they waited for people to arrive, Perry couldn't understand why they would celebrate, but it became clear to him after the first few people had arrived. He could see the sadness lifting from his grandfather's eyes. The dazed and empty look in his Gramps' eyes was replaced by the sparkle Perry remembered. So many people came through the house that afternoon, and almost all of them had a story to share about how wonderful, generous, and talented his grandmother was. The sound of his mother, uncle, and grandfather laughing replaced the dark moments leading up to the memorial celebration. Perry hoped that the joy would last. He was worried about Gramps living alone. People assured Perry that he would have many people looking after him during the days ahead. That night, Perry found it hard to fall asleep. His mind was racing with ideas about the end of life. He thought he had come to terms with the idea of death while talking with his friend and counselor at camp, but without proof, he grew worried about the idea that life would be over and there would be nothing. He reasoned that if others were sure of life after death, he should be too. Perry tossed and turned. It had been years since he wandered into his parents' bedroom because he couldn't sleep. He was much older and could work through most of his troubling thoughts, but on this night his thoughts were too intense. He hesitated at his parents' door, with sounds of snoring coming from his father. Just as he was turning to go back to his room, his mother called softly, "Perry, sweetie, what's wrong?" "I can't sleep," Perry whispered back. "My mind won't shut off. I'm sad about Gagi, and I'm afraid of life ending." His now awakened father croaked, "Come here, sport." Perry hopped onto the bed between his parents, trapping them under their bed covers, in the middle of a comforting parent sandwich. When other people have loved ones that die, I feel sorry for them, but this is really different. I miss Gagi so much that I can feel it. Perry's father patted him on his arm. It's okay to feel sad and think about the person who has passed, but you are just beginning your life's journey and should think about your bright future. When people we love pass on, it's like a wake-up call for us to make the most out of all the time we have together. I understand, but it doesn't make me feel any better, Perry whined. Well, Perry, his mother said thoughtfully, I feel my mother's loss very deeply, but she believes so strongly that dying was just a transition from this world to another, and that gives me comfort. The most important thing is to live a meaningful life while meeting and overcoming life's challenges. We need to become the best version of ourselves and leave the world a better place, like Gagi did. She touched so many lives with her artistic talent, and she helped others to find their own hidden talents. If we can build a life like that, we have truly lived. I know to the core of my being that there is much more to this world than we can see and touch. I am sure we will all be with Gagi again on the other side of our life here. But until that time, let's celebrate life and live it to its fullest. Sweetheart, when we quiet ourselves and pay attention, we may even be able to connect with Gagi on another level. I'm sure that from time to time, we will surely feel her as part of us. Perry sighed heavily as if a great weight had been lifted off of him. He hugged his parents and climbed off the bed, freeing them from their bed cover entrapment. Bidding good night, Perry returned to his own room. As he lay in his bed, he began his star meditation. This time, after picturing a beautifully colored star, he imagined his grandmother dancing with angels in a lush garden. With a peaceful feeling, Perry promised Gagi he would do something great with the life he was given to live. As time passed, Perry noticed little things that reminded him of his grandmother. They would always make him smile, and he felt a mixture of longing to be with her and at the same time a peaceful feeling that she was nearby no matter where he was. The thing that was most interesting to Perry was when years later he began to draw and paint again. Though he hadn't done so since Gagi died, his perspective and skill in drawing was better than it had ever been. It was like his hand was guided by another force. Perry smiled, and his heart filled with joy at the idea that Gagi was indeed with him. The end.